A warning. This podcast contains descriptions of sexual and family violence and self-harm, which some listeners may find disturbing. You can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or the domestic violence hotline 1800 RESPECT.
Subscribers to Shadow of Doubt get to hear episodes first and get access to all our bonus material. Subscribe at theaustralian.com.au or check out our channel on Apple Podcasts, Crime X Plus. Episodes 2 and 3 are available to binge right now.
I'm Richard Guilliatt. This is Shadow of Doubt. Episode 1, Australia's Most Evil Dad.
I'm Detective Senior Constable. The time is 9 a.m. It's the 29th of February.
It's a muggy February morning, the last day of summer, and a team of 11 detectives and uniformed police have turned up with a forensic truck outside a house surrounded by thick bushland in country New South Wales. The cops have come equipped with digging tools, a metal detector, and a video camera to record the raid, which is being led by a female detective dressed in a dark suit. As the camera pans, you can see a slim young woman standing among the police, dressed in a pink polo shirt, blue jeans and sneakers. She's staring intently at the ground. Her shoulders are hunched. We can't tell you this woman's name for reasons that will become clear, but she's the reason for this major police operation. For 3 months, she's been telling detectives an extraordinary, horrific story of the violent abuse she endured while growing up on this idyllic property. Now, she's returned home to help them find evidence. The young woman leads police down a path through the bush, skirting past the low-slung brick home where she's described being repeatedly raped by her father from age 5 to 18. Nearby is the garage, where she recalls being locked in a box overnight as punishment. The path winds down to a fast-flowing creek, where she recalls her father would drag her by the hair and viciously push her head underwater as punishment. Passing an orchard of fruit trees, she winds back toward the house and arrives at a dilapidated timber and tin shed, a place she's described to police as a virtual torture chamber.
So here's the shed. Don't need that just yet.
It was here, she says, that her father would violently abuse her with tools, stuff chilies in her mouth, hold a machete to her throat, and leave her bound in barbed wire, bleeding and naked for nights on end.
What I'll do is I'll put marker C just on the shed as we go.
As she leaves police, the young woman occasionally points to a patch of undergrowth or a cluster of rocks where a detective places yellow markers.
You can just wait there if you like, and I'll just...
Later, police return to these locations and dig up rusty implements. In the shed, they find a dirt-encrusted pair of girls' underwear. In the family home, they'll confiscate computers, diaries, letters and cameras. It will be another 4 years before this investigation reaches its conclusion in the New South Wales District Court, when the mother and father at the centre of it are found guilty of 86 charges of child abuse extending over 13 years. The evidence presented in court is so ghastly that people weep openly. The presiding judge describes the father as a depraved sadist, utterly without remorse. The media label him Australia's most evil dad. He is jailed for 48 years. the heaviest prison sentence ever imposed in Australia for child abuse. His wife is sentenced to 16 years for taking part in the abuse. It's a case that makes headlines around the world.
Over 13 years, her parents abused her in the most awful...
The worst of all crimes began here.
Has been jailed for 48 years. From the age of 5, the girl was raped and abused in indescribable ways.
But here's the strange thing. Not one witness during that trial could remember seeing any evidence of the sadistic violence the couple's daughter described. She told no one during all the years she lived with her parents, and she pursued a career in sports at the highest level. No doctor, no teacher, no trainer or physiotherapist reported any suspicion of the crimes she describes. Her own friends and others close to the family testified that they remembered her as a vibrant, supremely fit and popular young woman. Today, many of those people remain bewildered by the case and cannot reconcile the family they knew with the depraved monsters who were described in court.
I never seen anything out of the ordinary. Never ever did I hesitate leaving my child with them, ever.
The family itself, they were just loving and just a normal family, I would say. Very close and very loving.
Well, they're like normal people. I've been down to their property, no problems at all. Nice family. Yeah, very, very nice family.
Of course, child abuse is the most secret of crimes. Its perpetrators often hide in plain sight, using threats and manipulation to cover up their offending. Its victims may remain silent for years, even decades, because of shame and the fear of being disbelieved. As a society, we rightly condemn those who abuse children. And just to be clear, nothing in our reporting of this story should be interpreted as suggesting otherwise. But there's something even more unusual about this case. There are other children in this family who lived in the house where their sister was said to have been brutalised for more than a decade, and they also saw and heard nothing of the extraordinary violence she describes. Since their trial and convictions, the parents' judicial appeals have all failed, and the father now faces dying in prison if he serves his full sentence. His wife will not be eligible for parole for another 4 years. But from jail, they continue to proclaim their innocence, as they have done since the day police raided their home.
You are about to receive a phone call from the correctional facility. The conversation will be recorded and may be monitored. If you do not wish to receive this call, please hang up now.
I've got no understanding how, in a heartbeat, just in an instant, our lives changed overnight. And I still, like I say, I wake up and I'm in a prison, and I wake up every morning in this place thinking, how is this possible? Like, is this real? I wake up and think it's just a nightmare, and it's not. It's a living nightmare.
None of that happened. We never had any issues between us, and most definitely none of that stuff ever happened. The shed, the dragging through the house by the hair and stuff like that just never happened.
As a journalist, I've covered some strange stories in my career. In fact, I might even admit to a fascination with strange stories. I wrote a book about the satanic panic of the 1990s, when authorities around the world became convinced that Satanists were murdering children by the hundreds.
Were these animal sacrifices?
Animals and people.
I exposed Belle Gibson, the Melbourne woman who launched a global wellness business by pretending to have 5 different cancers.
I don't think I'm going to die tomorrow, but my body is dying.
I've interviewed conspiracy theorists who think the Earth might be flat, and I investigated Rolf Harris, the beloved Australian entertainer who is now a convicted paedophile. In 45 years of journalism, though, this story is the one that has left me the most disturbed and the most perplexed. Could a child be tortured and abused by her parents for 13 years, all through primary school and high school, without anyone noticing? Would a daughter accuse her parents of such ghastly crimes if they never happened? Would a jury convict if the evidence didn't stack up? Searching for answers to those questions involves confronting some uncomfortable truths about the way police, the courts, and the mental health system are dealing with the most unthinkable of crimes: child sexual abuse. The veteran Sydney criminal lawyer Greg Walsh, who is acting pro bono for the convicted mother, is among those pushing for a judicial review of the case.
I just feel that here there was a real possibility of a miscarriage of justice, and I'm really concerned about it. That's why I'm prepared to continue to help her in her fight for justice.
But before we go any further, a warning. It's impossible to delve into this case and the issues it raises without discussing allegations of child abuse that are very disturbing. If you have difficulty coping with such material, this is not the podcast for you. It's also impossible to tell this story without changing some elements of it, because there are strict laws against identifying victims of child abuse. So we'll be calling the couple at the centre of this case Martin and Susan Johnson, although that's not their real names. From their separate cells, they've given their account of this case in hundreds of phone calls, limited to as little as 6 minutes at a time. To hide their identities, we've distorted their voices and those of other family members. I've also interviewed many of their friends in the course of researching this podcast, and their names have been changed, along with the names of other key people in the story. We can't tell you exactly when the events you'll hear about happened, other than that it was sometime in the past 15 years. But the story that follows is based on the direct testimony of those involved, as well as thousands of documents from the court proceedings. I first learned about the Johnsons' case when newspapers and TV news bulletins first revealed its shocking details. It was described as one of the worst examples of domestic child abuse in the world, yet strangely, nothing had been reported during the 12-week trial. It turned out that the media had been barred from publishing any of the proceedings until the jury reached its verdicts. Even then, journalists were only given a written summary of the prosecution case and allowed into court for the Johnsons' sentencing.
Please be seated.
The crimes they'd been convicted of were so extensive that the judge took 2 days to deliver her sentencing remarks. The judge revealed that 2 of the couple's daughters had given evidence against them, and both had provided police with childhood diaries recording their suffering. The torture instruments described by one of the daughters had been found buried on the family property. Her trauma was so severe that she had developed a mental illness called dissociative identity disorder. That particular detail caught my eye because I had reported on other cases involving dissociative identity disorder, cases in which extraordinary violence was said to have occurred without anyone noticing. After the Johnsons were led off to jail, the TV cameras filmed a young woman hurrying from the court building, her face blurred. It was the couple's other daughter, we'll call her Rebecca, who had attended the trial with her mother.
Would you like to give us a comment about the sentence?
What hadn't been widely reported is that the Johnsons have other children, and 2 of them, Rebecca and her brother Daniel, had stood by their parents throughout the trial. When I tracked Rebecca down, she was back home and arranged to meet me in the gym where she trained. We sat down in a bare upstairs room, and for the next 3 hours, she proceeded to tell me that everything that had been alleged in court was false. The abuse, the torture, it was all a fiction that had been encouraged by misguided counsellors and overzealous police.
Okay, I think we're going. So look...
Is that working, no?
Yeah, it is working. Yeah, it is.
All I'm saying is I know I cannot find one thing in one of these allegations that's possible. Get up, eat breakfast together, go to school, you come home together. It's to me, it's a million times impossible. I don't remember a single thing feeling anything in the family dynamics of sexual abuse. I would remember that. I wouldn't be as close to my mother. I wouldn't feel as comfortable as I do with my mum. I wouldn't trust my mum. I believe it's been one small thing accumulated into one big lie from lots of different avenues.
Rebecca's brother, Daniel, also spoke to me that day, and he was equally emphatic. These are his words, but not his real voice.
They're my family. I've been there my whole life. I've never seen anything like anything described in any of those allegations. I don't know why she said these things. There's no possible way that any of them about my dad could be true, or my mother. It's ridiculous. It's impossible.
So, who are the Johnsons, and how did they come to be admired by their friends, and yet reviled as Australia's most monstrous paedophiles? It's a story that can only be told in parts to avoid identifying them. They're a sports-mad family, but we can't reveal exactly which sports they pursued. Suffice to say that as a young man, Martin Johnson was a champion athlete until injury cruelled his ambitions and he became a high school teacher. He met his future wife Susan when he was in his late 20s. Susan was then a 20-year-old model and aerobics instructor, 1 year into an unhappy marriage and studying to become a teacher.
I'd gone to the gym, so we met in a gym, so I just ended up walking out of my marriage, basically walked with nothing and got myself a unit. He had his own house, start to sort of see each other and get a bit more serious, yeah.
Within a year of meeting, the couple had the first of their children, and after they married, Martin Johnson moved into tertiary education. They bought a home on a bush block in New South Wales, and Susan began teaching sports and fitness. Their 3 daughters, Emily, Sarah and Rebecca, showed a flair for sport from an early age. This was a family that might start the day with a vigorous strength workout and a 5-kilometre run. But a series of personal tragedies befell Susan in her late 20s, including the loss of 2 children. The couple's son, Daniel, was born prematurely and needed learning support. Those years tipped Susan into a clinical depression, and she consulted a psychiatrist for a time. Martin Johnson retreated into his work, spending long periods travelling in pursuit of his career, and the marriage fractured.
I always trained, and I never ever stopped training, and all through the pregnancies, all through the tragedies. But it was difficult when he was away. I had my children, I had a beautiful home, and that was my focus. And then it was just 7 years of absolute tragedy. That was when I needed him, and he did fail me in that regard, that, I really, really did need him, and things became our marriage did really fragment at that stage.
There were ugly moments in these years, marked by heated arguments, and Susan Johnson acknowledges that police were once called to the house after her husband began hurling objects around. Whether he was physically violent to her would be one of the many issues later disputed at their trial. But today we understand that violence in families can take many forms. including verbal abuse and coercion. Martin Johnson says he's had time to reflect in jail, and he admits to being angry and failing his family. But listening to him talk about these toxic years in the marriage, he sometimes sounds like a man making excuses, and it's not clear he understands the impact that his behaviour had on his wife and his children.
You know, I was under enormous pressure, you know, because we had taken out a fairly large mortgage in those days. There was a lot of financial pressures, and that, I guess, the fact I was working longer hours, I was probably overworking. I'd become a bit of a workaholic, no doubt about that. And yeah, I guess I just became a bit unsettled, a little bit angry. It got to the stage I was away so much that I felt that I was, you know, not part of the family, like a true father. And I wasn't. I provided for them, but I was never around.
Eventually, the Johnsons separated, and Susan and the children moved into a house they bought closer to the kids' schools. The girls were by now competing in regional sports and excelling, with Emily emerging as the most gifted and tenacious. Even before she became a teenager, she was breaking records and had appeared on television, boasting about her Olympic dreams. Friends who trained with her remember her as a ferocious competitor.
Oh, just was an animal with it, just wanted it more and more and more, couldn't get enough. Not just chosen sport, in multiple sports, could have represented Australia in multiple sports. And that created a bit of jealousy because she was so talented. The first big memory I have of her was crying because she wasn't allowed to come to training.
A little over a year after the Johnsons separated, they reconciled, and Martin Johnson quit his tertiary job to become a full-time sports coach. Their daughters already had their sights set on professional sports careers, and to save money, he coached them as well. As a father and as a coach, Johnson was a disciplinarian. He was popular and successful, but even those who liked him conceded he had a touch of arrogance. The Johnsons became a fixture on the local sports scene, and the kids they coached were regular visitors to their property, often sleeping over in groups on weekends or in school holidays. Some who knew the family weren't sure how to take their quirks, the intense sibling competition, the secluded home where sport and fitness were a relentless focus. The Johnsons' children had all attended local schools, but even their own grandparents felt that their academic and social lives suffered because of their fixation with sports. Susan was a devoted mother, but she got tongues wagging one year when she organised a fundraising calendar which featured the girls posing in bikinis. One photo, taken by her husband, showed their teenage daughter Sarah peeking out from behind a tree, evidently naked. 4 years later, Susan invited a professional photographer to the property and posed naked with her daughters in the bush, their bodies discreetly shielded by foliage. The girls were aged 16 to 20 at the time, and the photos were intended for another calendar and to offer them a taste of modelling, which had been Susan's sideline income as a younger woman. The calendar never got printed, but the headmistress of the girls' high school was among those who thought it completely inappropriate. Others saw it as an example of Susan's slight naivety.
They would probably go down to those rock pools and wear no clothes swimming because they're the only people there for a whole massive area. And the girls were extremely close. So yeah, I know it is weird to some people, but for them, not so.
That's Peter. Well, it's not Peter actually. That's a name we have to give him. He trained with the Johnsons for years, visited their property many times, and lived with them at one point for 6 months. Like many who knew the family, he has fond memories of his time with them.
But it was fun. We camped down by the beautiful rock pools. Like, you just go down there because it's beautiful.
This is a description I would hear from dozens of people who knew the family, such as this mother, whose teenage daughter trained with Martin Johnson for several years.
It was most school holidays for at least 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 days, and all the kids would come together. They loved it. They just lived and breathed it.
It was always a happy place. We were free to chill out and roam and, just have fun with each other. So we would, sometimes sit on the couch and watch a movie. We'd go down and explore the property. We'd sit by the creek and everyone would just mingle and be happy and really were free to do what they wanted with the group of people that they wanted to hang out with.
That last voice you heard was Emily Johnson's close friend through her teenage years, who we'll call Kathy. She trained alongside Emily and was coached by Martin Johnson from the ages of 12 to 15. During her teen years, she stayed overnight at the Johnson house on scores of occasions. She attended the same schools as Emily and remembers her as someone who lived and breathed sport.
She absolutely thrived on sport. She absolutely loved competing and training, and I suppose that thought of her being victorious and people knowing her for being, the best at something, she absolutely loved it, and there's no doubt in my mind that that's the case.
Elite sport is brutally competitive, and not everyone has the mental resilience to manage that pressure. At 12, Emily was a local superstar. By her mid-teens, she was competing interstate and facing tougher rivals. She began suffering anxiety attacks before events, one of which put her in hospital, and her parents referred her to a psychologist. Martin Johnson was a demanding coach, and some sports officials thought he drove his daughter too hard. At 14, she pulled out of one event suddenly, and her father admits that he angrily berated her. If her performance was below par, she would sometimes offer excuses that raised eyebrows. Here's an example from a trainer's report at an interstate sports camp when she was 15.
Emily appeared agitated, adamant that she had no nerves or anxiety and was in control. However, she became extremely upset, crying and complaining of a sore rib that she had fractured 2 months ago. This was the first time she had mentioned this injury. It had not appeared on a medical form. She became unsteady on her feet and said she felt like she would faint. She said Dad would be cross with her for getting upset and would tell her to push through the pain. She also spoke of being nearly raped, having a knife pulled to her neck.
It seems that Emily's claim of a knife-point sexual assault was never really investigated, which might seem hard to understand. But even among her own friends, Emily had gained a reputation around this time as someone who loved winning so much that she could sometimes spin tales to explain away a disappointing result. The report from this athletics camp goes on to mention that one evening she turned up at a coach's door at midnight with a grazed forehead, saying she'd accidentally knocked herself unconscious. After these incidents, her name was withdrawn from a major event overseas. At 16, she complained of severe abdominal pain and underwent an appendectomy, but no infection was found. And then, a year later, events took a far more serious turn when she competed overseas for the first time at a major tournament in the Middle East. Earlier that year, Martin Johnson had pulled back from coaching and taken a job overseas in order to meet the financial demands of his family. The Johnsons' daughter Sarah was pursuing her sports career overseas, and her sister Rebecca was on the cusp of turning professional. It meant that Emily arrived at her first international competition without family support, part of a large delegation from Australia. She was 17 and shared a hotel room with a 15-year-old friend, Ruby, who trained with her father, and another 17-year-old who she hadn't met before, Tara. Within 48 hours of arriving, Emily's roommates would both complain about the conduct of one of the team's male masseurs, a former school teacher and rugby trainer in his 60s. Here is Ruby's account.
I just didn't like the way, he'd touch your shoulder and he'd rub down your back, and that just creeped me out. And I was like, nah, don't like it. Touches me again, I'm going to lose my... And the next time, we were in the elevator picking everyone up, ready for a bus day or whatever. And I lost my shit in front of everyone. I just remember going off at him.
If you're wondering why a 60-something man was authorised to massage a 15-year-old schoolgirl on a government-sponsored sports tour, Ruby never received a good explanation. Today, she's still not sure if the creepy touching was inadvertent or deliberate. But a day later, her roommate Tara returned from a session with the same masseur, complaining that he had touched her pubic area while massaging her thighs. Here is Tara's account of how Emily reacted when she heard what had happened.
I wanted to let her know and talk to somebody about, having this massage that was really uncomfortable, and I didn't understand exactly what had happened. I just knew I didn't want a massage from him anymore. And she said that she felt uncomfortable with him too, and something had happened, but she didn't really know what it was either, and she just felt uncomfortable too. And so we decided that we would go tell one of the female managers. Just before we went, she said, can you tell me exactly what happened in that massage? And I told her the explicit details. And she said to me, that's not right, and that's not okay. That's really serious. She said something like that had happened with her sister, and the person turned out to be a pedophile. And so we need to go and tell somebody immediately. At that point, I didn't understand. And so we went together and we told the female physio.
That comment that Emily made about her sister, we'll come back to that later in the podcast, because it's an issue that could be central to this case, and it does require some explanation. Tara recalls being puzzled by what Emily was saying about the masseur. She knew he had visited their room the night before with a female official while conducting a routine check, but she'd seen nothing untoward happen. And when they went to report him to a team official, Emily said nothing, even though Tara's complaint prompted the masseur's removal from the team. But later, that night, Emily woke up screaming in terror, a pattern that repeated for the rest of the trip.
After I had told her what happened to me, and during the night she would wake up screaming and crying and, almost like this night terror. And she was unconsolable. So she and I moved into the other room. I would mind her in the night when she would wake up and scream. I would go and console her. So that happened for the rest of the trip.
In the days that followed, Emily's performance on the sports field was erratic. At one point, she collapsed in the middle of an event. Yet later, she performed at her best. Back in Australia, her mother Susan was approached at a sports meeting one morning by a police officer who was a friend of the family, a man we'll call Dave. Susan Johnson recalls Dave telling her that Emily had called him from overseas and had suggested that something happened on the tour.
So he came to me and he said that she had phoned him and had said that there had been something had happened. There had been an incident, and it's something that he felt she should have told her mother. She should have told me.
When Emily returned to Australia, she withdrew to her bedroom and began drawing nightmarish, violent images of a male figure. Her mother remembers becoming increasingly alarmed and pressed her for details about what had happened overseas. Here is Emily's mum.
And then I don't know if at that stage she'd revealed to me, I think she had revealed to me that she had been sexually assaulted. It was probably Not long after she got back, a week after, because I was so disturbed at her behaviour that I said to her, "What's wrong? Has something happened? I know something's happened." And I actually said to her, "Did he rape you?" And she said yes. And that was, when I just said, "Oh my God, we've got to go to the police. We've got to report this."
The one local cop the Johnsons knew socially was Dave, who Emily had phoned from overseas. His sons played sport with Emily, and he had once helped her with some research for a school project. He trained with Susan Johnson, and he'd visited the Johnsons' home with his wife after Emily's return from overseas. On that visit, Susan had noticed her daughter seemed at ease talking to him.
She was just really, really gravitating towards him, and and I just thought it was because he was a police officer, safety, and she knew him, she trusted him, as we all did. We all trusted him.
A week before Christmas, Susan and her daughter Rebecca drove with Emily to the police station where Dave was posted in a nearby town. When they got there, Dave suggested to Susan that he should interview her daughter privately, even though she was not yet 18. Only later did Susan discover that no formal statement was ever written up. The only surviving record of Dave's interview with Emily is an incident report he lodged in the New South Wales police database. Written in police jargon, it refers to her as the victim and the masseur as the POI, person of interest. Here is an excerpt from that report.
The victim states that she woke about 9 p.m. to find the POI lying on her bed. She states he had his hand on her vagina and was digitally penetrating her. She believes he was also attempting to kiss her as his face was extremely close and she was aware of his breath. The victim was terrified and in a state of shock and states that when the POI realised she was awake, he got off the bed and left the room without speaking.
The report went on to say that Dave had consulted police legal affairs and he'd confirmed that prosecution was not possible because the incident had happened overseas. Susan Johnson says he told her the same thing. There was nothing much he could do. Which seems odd because the federal police can investigate crime overseas, and Emily had mentioned that the masseur might also have assaulted other young women. Dave passed the case on to a colleague and made a note to send a brief to the Director of Public Prosecutions. He advised Susan Johnson to take Emily to the sexual assault counselling service adjacent to the local hospital. It was there that Emily met the social worker who would become her confidant for the next 3 years. We'll call her Donna. Emily's story of being raped on tour would change over time. In later versions, she would suggest the masseur had spiked her drink in the hours before she went to bed. Her friend Ruby was among those who wondered, how could Emily have been raped in their shared hotel room without anyone noticing, and why had she said nothing until she returned to Australia? Ruby's mother had also travelled on the tour, and she'd noticed nothing unusual, even though she knew Emily well.
And I went to their room and I seen where they lived. I got no signs of anything. Like that was a couple of times I seen them and no signs of anything. We didn't know until we got back, and I went, holy do it. Had no idea this even happened over there. Didn't pick up any signs of it or anything like that.
But she asked to use your phone. Yeah. And yet, Emily began exhibiting all the symptoms of trauma. She was withdrawn and emotionally volatile, irrationally insisting that she wanted to perform her training routines backwards, to turn back time. Her mother was convinced something terrible had happened.
I was just very, very concerned about her behaviour. Yes, I had seen her, suffer anxiety attacks and suffer from incidents, but it wasn't to this extent. And I did believe her because she was older and, I thought we were very close. But as time went on, I did, certainly now, I have doubts, obviously with what she said about myself and her father and so forth. I have doubts, but it still disturbs me that So that was the triggering point. So I don't know whether something happened or didn't happen, but it was definitely the triggering point to this whole thing.
Emily was scheduled to compete at a sports camp beginning on Boxing Day, and she drove there with her father. Within a day of arriving, her disturbed behaviour was causing chaos. She suffered panic attacks. She cut her arms and gave confusing accounts to team officials about the alleged rape overseas. One night, she was found stumbling around her room after taking a handful of pain tablets. But when team officials summoned her father, he was visibly annoyed and made no move to comfort his daughter. Martin Johnson told me he was wrestling with doubts about Emily's story of the rape and said as much to her. He admits angrily telling her that she was derailing her career. Emily was making daily phone calls to her counsellor, Donna, telling her she was scared of her father. The counsellor, in her notes, recalls asking a blunt question: "Has your father ever sexually assaulted you?" Emily replied, "No." But only 2 days later, while complaining to a camp official about her father's controlling ways, Emily dropped a bombshell. She told the official her dad had touched her inappropriately in the past when he was giving her sports massages. Immediately, arrangements were made for Emily to return home separately from Martin Johnson, without telling him why. A day after she got home, Emily went to the sexual assault centre for an appointment with Donna. She told the counsellor that in the past, her father had made her uncomfortable when he massaged the adductor muscles in her inner thigh. Donna's notes record the exact complaint.
At age 13 to 16 years, he would massage adductors. She would ask him to stop, but he would continue. She felt the massages were not appropriate as she had other massages before and more care is taken when massaging around pelvis. Father would go into his room following.
Emily told her counsellor that her sisters had also discussed their father's massages, which was true. Her sister Sarah, when she was in her mid-teens, had also complained that the massages made her feel uncomfortable. Susan Johnson says the family discussed this issue and they took steps to have the girls trained by a masseur so they could massage each other. But Emily's mother says she had no idea that this topic had become a focus of her daughter's counselling. She knew only that her daughter was spending hours in hushed phone conversations with Donna, and that Emily's relationship with her father had become openly hostile. Her mental state deteriorated so rapidly that one night Susan Johnson found her daughter rocking in a fetal position on a sofa, talking about wanting to end her life. The following day, when Emily again called Donna, her mother insisted on speaking to the counsellor.
I think it was early morning. She was on the phone to her again. I grabbed the phone and said, I need to talk to her, and told her what had happened, that she was getting worse and worse, and what should I do? What help can I get her? And she suggested that I bring her into the hospital, the adolescent ward, and take it from there, where I could talk to some psychiatrists and see if they could, help her at that point. She reassured me that it wouldn't be a permanent thing, that it would just be a matter of sitting down and getting some support.
Emily and her mother arrived at the emergency department of the local hospital that morning. Only later would the Johnsons discover that even before they walked in the door, counsellors from the sexual assault centre had called the hospital to share their dark suspicions about the family. Among other things, the counsellors told doctors that Emily's parents had been reluctant to seek help from local services for their traumatised daughter. It was a baseless accusation. The Johnsons had sent Emily to a local psychologist over her anxiety attacks. They'd taken her straight to police and the counselling centre, and then later the hospital after she reported being raped. But this and other misinformation about the family was entered into Emily's hospital file on the day she was admitted. When I told Susan Johnson about this over the phone line from prison, it was the first time she'd heard of it, and she was shocked.
You know, the first thing I did when I saw her in the crisis she was in was to seek help. Firstly through taking her to see a police officer to report the incident, and then to ask where to bring her to get her the help she needed. And I was continually asking her herself, what is it that she needs? What is it that, you know, that I can do as her mother to get her the help she needed? That is just so far from the truth. You would think as a mother you could take your daughter to seek help from your local hospital or your local mental health facility, and this is what's happened, this is what they've done.
Something else happened around this time that the Johnsons didn't know about. Not long after Emily was admitted to the adolescent mental health ward, she called Tara, the young woman who had shared her hotel room overseas and had complained about the masseur. The two young women had kept in touch since returning home, and Tara remembers that call vividly.
So she called me one day and she said, you know, she'd updated me that things had been hard for her, and she told me that she had remembered things that had happened to her overseas that night that she was unwell. And I said, you know, what happened? And she said that the physio, the one that had touched me, had raped her. And I was really confused. It was never a matter of me doubting her and her word, but it was more I couldn't understand how that could have happened time-wise and, you know, noise-wise, and and even the not telling me and talking to me about it on the trip. I said, what do you mean? How could that have happened? And she said she doesn't remember exactly, but she does definitely remember a deep pressure on her chest, and she does remember that she was raped, and it had all come back to her. All these memories had flooded back to her when she had tried to go and have sex with her partner, and that she just remembered all of these things from then.
Shadow of Doubt is a podcast investigation from The Australian. It's written and presented by Richard Guilliatt and produced and mixed by our multimedia editor, Lia Tsamoglou. I'm Editorial Director Claire Harvey, host of our daily news podcast, The Front, where you'll hear our journalists talking candidly about their stories. You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. Just say, play the news from The Australian to hear the latest episode. Subscribe to our channel CrimeX Plus on Apple Podcasts, or search The Australian wherever you get your podcasts. And you can check out all our journalism anytime at theaustralian.com.au.
In the next episode of Shadow of Doubt.
It was just like your sister was just disappearing. She was so drugged out. There was no emotion. There was no nothing.
She wasn't getting better, she was just getting worse and worse. But no one seemed to be able to explain to me why that was happening.